Let's try this again.
All right. Okay, guys. Well, I'm Barry, Geek Out Studio guild member, and today we kind of go over foam smithing, how to work with armor. I've got things kind of broken down in some weird, fashionable order, and then after the presentation, we'll kind of like tackle individual problems and get you started on some basic things. But before all of that, you need to have your basic tools, which is how I've kind of got this table broken down. If you are drafting your own patterns, you will want to make foam rulers dependent on whatever thickness of, I was going to say armor, but whatever thickness foam you are using. So, like, this is 1/2 inch, and this is 1/4 inch. You'll also notice there's a bit of difference in density, but you cannot use a standard tape measure because foam and its thickness will take up more space. So if you used a tape measure and had like an 8-inch wrist with foam, that may be like 10 or so inches. Next, you will definitely want a heat gun. You can get them pretty much anywhere. You can get them at Lowe's, Home Depot. Yeah, thank you. I got this at Harbor Freight for I think maybe like 30-40 bucks. But definitely a heat gun. Hair dryer does not get hot enough to allow you to mold and work with foam. This heat gun is actually pretty nice because it has adjustable and variable heat. So if I'm working with like a big piece, I can up the temperature if I really want to get working fast. Or if I'm working on a thinner piece or whatever, I can adjust the temperature. Next, you will want blades, some kind of cutting device. I've got, I call these utility knives, but apparently they're box cutters, whatever. I also use a bandsaw if you have access to one.
You do have one here. It is just in
Yeah,
the other room.
exactly. But you'll need blades. You'll need contact cement. Now, a lot of people, I've seen a lot of tutorials and a lot of things saying, oh, I put it together with hot glue and things like that. I do not use hot glue for a couple reasons. Number one, we live in the South where it's summer for like 8 months out of the year. And outside temperature could possibly get hot enough to make the hot glue malleable. Number two, I don't use hot glue because you do not get an even, smooth, consistent coat along your seam. So, which can make bonding pieces difficult, could lead to unruly and messy seams. The only thing I use hot glue for is to either reinforce and seal my seams, or if I'm basically insetting a piece, I use that to glue that into place. So that's the only reason why I use hot glue. And then, of course, you will want a metal ruler, a good sturdy metal ruler. What's nice about this with the softback is it takes double-sided tape quite nicely. So if you're working on an odd piece at an odd angle or whatever, you can put a little bit of double-sided tape on here and stick it onto your piece, and it's stuck there. So those are your basic beginning level tools. If you're going to want to do anything, these are the tools you'll want. Next up, we have kind of intermediate or advanced tools. So this is just a blade sharpener. So if you want to save a little money on blades, go ahead and get a blade sharpener. So that's pretty much a nice thing to have. you'll want a Dremel or a rotary tool. This will help you with some beveling. It could also help with certain detailing. I've seen a lot of guys use it to get like a wood grain effect. I've seen guys will bevel the blade of a sword with the sanding bit, and then I'll show you later on, but then you can take that sanding drum off, and this little rubber piece spins at enough RPMs or cycles or whatever you want to say it to where it will actually help smooth out any of the pieces that you sand. So on that topic, though, you can up the ante, and if you want to play with fire, a butane torch does a really good job at smoothing out, because it basically remelts the foam. So any sanding that you do or any rough edges, you can hit it with a torch and it'll basically smooth it back down. Then we have basically a soldering or wood burning tool. It's not necessary, but it's another tool that you can use to get certain details and whatnot. Now, the only key thing with this is if you do use this, please make sure that it's in a well-ventilated area and you are wearing some kind of respirator, because burning EVA foam, otherwise known as polyethylene something, yes, thank you, will give off basically dangerous and toxic fumes. So make sure you're in a well-ventilated area. Same can be said about the contact cement. And then this is from Lou. This is a cool little foam forge or foam anvil. Basically, you can heat up a piece of foam and then start shaping it. If you're looking at making curves or whatever, this is a good little handy tool to have. I just use my knee, so you know.
Costable $2.
Yeah. I have a knee. She made this out of a couple of bucks. My knee came with me at birth. I would have to make this. So, you know. And then finally at the end is you're going to want to have...
Burn! I know! Knees burn! Those guns get hot!
My knees are bony, so they would have like weird like...
Anyways.
I guess you would need something.
Yeah.
Details.
Then at the final level, you'll want to, these are basically the finishing tools. Yes, Plasti Dip, I've got an example here, but I use DAP Quick Seal. This is a great method and a great little product to help basically smooth out and close up any seams to where you have it's a smooth, continuous surface. It won't look like you've got, cuts everywhere. It's also pretty good at filling in any mistakes or pinholes in your foam. And then finally there is Mod Podge. Huh?
Is it sandable?
No, it is not.
A wet finger.
Yes, you use wet finger. I'll show you basically. That's what I did here.
It's a wet finger.
Yeah, which is kind of a little bit better because, yeah, it goes with the contour of the foam. But no, this is not sandable. Really, the thing is that this end of the finishing part is not much is going to be sandable at this point. The key to getting a clean product starts down here with getting precise measurements and getting clean, precise cuts. So the cleaner your cuts are, the more precise your measurements are, the cleaner your final product will be. It also starts down here with knowing how to apply the contact cement to getting good, clean end results. All of this is just to basically take out the foam look of your product or whatever you're making. So, because that's the key thing with Plasti-Dip. Plasti-Dip will dry and will end smooth, but it's dependent on how smooth your starting surface is. So, yeah. Mod Podge, I generally will put a very thin coat, and this is just simply to get out any of the small, very small, tiny bubbles and just really to smooth out the surface even more. So, yes, sir.
Water down your Mod Podge, or you use straight?
Huh?
Water it down, or
I actually will water it down because I apply it with a sponge brush. So I will actually like dip the brush in water, squeeze it out, and then dip it in here before I apply it. So like I said, this is not for any like real structural purposes or anything. It's just to, again, help take out the foam look when I start going to putting on the Plasti-Dip. So those are your tools. Like I said, ranging from, beginning basic to intermediate and advanced, and some of the finishing techniques. So next we'll kind of just really quick go over how you go from basically a pattern to a finished product. So depending on what you're making, how you're making it, if you're doing something, from scratch, take your measurements. I like working on poster board because it just works better. And so that's that. But generally, I will put little marks about, which way's up, which is left, which is right, and so forth. Now, if you're going more advanced, where you're making more advanced something like this, like Halo armor, what I will do is I will actually just fully mock up the piece with cardstock. This is just made from 110-pound cardstock. And basically, I go ahead and I mock it up. This helps me in a couple of ways when it starts coming to working with foam. Number one, particularly with this piece, I can actually go through and map out the angles, so I know what angles I have to cut, at what angle to cut it at. I also get a good idea at what pieces can I fudge with just using the thickness of whatever foam I'm using. So, for example, like these are all separate pieces. I could, theoretically, this looks to be about 1/4 inch or so. I could make this piece out of 1/4 inch foam and just use this as the thickness of the foam. That way I'm not actually making these all individual pieces. It's just the thickness of the foam. But there's different angles and everything, so yay, that gets to start having fun. This also helps me to realize, how does this piece go together? Because with cosplay, particularly with armor and foam work, there are no instructions. You pretty much just have to put it together. It's quicker, easier, and cheaper to put it together with paper than printing it, cutting it on foam, and realizing, I don't know how this piece goes together. Or you may get an effect like you, and you end up, you've put it backwards.
Yep. I have a whole Surtur skull. Backwards.
Yeah, backwards. So, yeah. And working it out on paper allows me to also notate. So again, this has all the angles this piece has. It also helps me to start notating, particularly with this. This is for the left side of the shoulder. So I mark left. Then when I need to make the right side, I know I just need to mirror it. And then with something like this, I can left, I think it's like left 2 or something. whatever notation will help with you. It just helps me figure out what pieces and how it goes together. So that's starting. If you're drafting your own pattern, you should probably already have a method in your mind at how this goes together. So after that, it starts coming down to cutting the foam. Now again, with this particular piece of armor, you can see that there are a whole lot of facets. Thankfully, I have access to a bandsaw, but still, I needed to plot out all the various angles. And the notations here are on the foam are the same that I had on my paper model. This gives this, so when I go to cut, I know I need to cut in at such and such degree of angle. So, pass that around. So, and this is also made out of a variety of different thicknesses. Generally, I go with, if it is a load-bearing piece or a major structural piece, I'll use 13 millimeter foam or 1/2 inch. And if it's just detail and whatnot, I will use the 1/4 inch or 6 mil foam. And then more details is just used with craft foam. 3 mil, 4 mil, whatever is needed for to get the right, I guess, dimension of the detail. So anyways, that's all put together. Next part would then be to start filling in your seams, closing in your seams. You can, depending on how it comes out, this is where having a Dremel. Okay, anyways. Thank you. Thank you. This is where having a Dremel comes in handy, because say you messed up like right here. There's a slight buckle in the seam right here. What you can do is just go over it, sand it to where it's smooth, take the drumming wheel off, sand or hit it with a butane torch, and that way you get this, you get your planes level. Because like I said, once you put the DAP is not sandable. Okay? You should also make sure you've gone in and done any more additional heat shaping before you apply the DAP. But the DAP is pretty simple. Once you start going into filling in your seam, I just put a little bit of DAP along the seam, and then I just take my finger, rub it down really, and then I'll dip my finger in a little bit of water and then rub it back and forth, and that helps smooth it out. And like I said, you can pass that around and you can see the how it has smoothed out, and you can rub your finger. And now I've done those seams about 3 times with the DAP, so you know, depending on you know how deep the seam is or how messed up the seam is will depend on, you know, how many times you want to do it. If you look carefully, you might see a couple little nicks where I hit it, where I hit a couple parts with my blade. You can use the DAP joint compound to go in and fill in those little nicks and whatnot. So again, I just put a little bit in, hit it with my finger, dip my finger in some water, smooth it all out. So once that's all done, that's when you can apply the, like I said, once you're at the DAP stage, the piece is basically done, and you're ready to start applying your colors and your paints and everything. Which comes up to our final piece, that's after the DAP dries and sets up and everything. I then apply a very thin layer of Mod Podge, maybe like one layer. And then I start applying my Plasti Dip. Plasti Dip, again, you have to kind of know how to work with it. It's not very difficult. Biggest thing is just put it in warm water, because that helps through chemistry or whatever, that helps the propellant and pigments and everything mix better. And then you just sit there and you shake the can for about a good minute or so, and then you start applying it. And I apply very thin layers. So that is about 4 or so layers of Plasti Dip. So yeah, that's about 4 or so layers of Plasti Dip. And again, it's applied with very thin layers. I will spray one layer and then let it dry for about 30 minutes, and then spray another layer, let it dry for about 30 minutes, then spray another layer, blah, 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 blah. So, and then again, like this is another piece. The detail in the center I did with the wood burning tip, but again, that helps you see the difference in the effect of what a wood burning tip can do. It also shows a bit of how I work with different thicknesses of foam. Just to get the different layers, all I did was glue a 1/4 inch piece around a 1/2 inch piece. So, yeah. Any other questions, comments, or concerns?
Ooh, you suck!
I didn't see contact cement the other day, so I got the E6000. Is that okay to work with foam?
Yes.
Or will that cause that?
The power plant, Kat, if you can reach behind your head for the power plant real quick.
Which was the power plant? Never mind. The other Loki stole it.
Yeah. That is actually how I... Yes, it's a fancy hat.
Oh, it's a codpiece now.
Yeah. The E6000...
Good plate. Bless you.
Thank you.
Gross.
I use the E6000 to actually glue this piece to this piece, and you can see that it's pretty much in place as long as you're not going to like sit here and actually try and rip it apart. The only thing is that it takes a little bit longer. Like I had to hold this into position for about good 15 minutes or so before the E6000 dried enough for it to snag. The only criticism is if you look up under here, you'll see a little bit of what I call spider webbing, but that's in a position that nobody is going to see from 6 feet away. You basically have to be in her personal bubble looking. So yeah, it's actually on the, yeah. So that's the only drawback. But like I said, it worked great because it allowed me to slide that piece into position. Because if I use contact cement, yeah, it's one shot and that's it. It's the same thing with super glue. If I put super glue and I didn't get that position correct the first time, it's in there. But the E6000 is strong enough to hold it, but it gave me enough working time to move it into position. So, yeah, that's the biggest.
Where do you get your patterns if you're not making them yourself?
That's a pretty good
falling.
question.
It's falling. It's
I'm watching
falling.
I'm watching it fall.
You're not helping.
Huh?
Oh, the foam. I'm like, it's going to take out
I
a
was like, I
stand.
know it's falling. I wanted to see what happens.
It depends on the pattern. For example, I do a lot of halo armor, obviously. So I get my patterns from the 405th Infantry Division. They are the Halo costuming, global Halo costuming community. So any and all Halo armor that you can think of is there. If you're doing something like Warhammer 40,000, which I'm doing, Obscurus Crusade has patterns there. You could sometimes find patterns on the RPF. So if you're doing like an Iron Man outfit, you can find them on the RPF. And then yes, there are people that will make and sell patterns. There was, and depending if it works or not, Onkura, whatever. It's basically the Pepakura library.
It's been down for a while.
Yeah, I know.
You have to go to their Facebook page.
Yeah.
Pure Library.
The Pepakura library has a lot of other patterns. But pretty much the Pepakura library has all of the major patterns that you can think of. So like Batman stuff, Iron Man, so forth and so on, yada, yada, yada. Any other questions?
So you do use Pepakura?
Yes. This is actually, this is a Pepakura. It's basically, well, Pepakura bottle. The only difference between Pepakura, this Pepakura, and the foam is basically, if I were to pull this all apart, you wouldn't see glue tabs. So you can actually see it on the inside. There are no glue tabs because, you know, foam is thicker than paper. The other nice thing is with Pepakura, you can do things with foam that paper won't do. So, example, this piece right here, it has a whole bunch of darts because paper doesn't really make a compound curve. Foam, I just cut the basic shape out, used my knee, and got the compound curve. So now the only other difference though is with foam, depending on the armor, depending on the project or whatever, like this Halo armor you can see has a lot of very hard angles, a lot of facets. You can't really, well, you can't, but I say that, but you can do that in foam. It just requires that you basically do what is called back cutting. And basically you trace where these fold lines are onto your foam, and that's where you cut on the back side to bend it. The only thing is though is that you can see there is a difference in the effect. For example, this is a separate piece from here. So I cut this piece at like 45 or 22 and a half, and I cut this piece at 22 and a half or 45 and glued it together. That gave me that nice sharp angle. Whereas these angles, you can still see them, but they're a bit rounded. Now you can get sharper angles if you are using thinner foam. So that's the only other difference. So, wow. Other questions? Before we actually like maybe move out or do something to actually show you how to work with stuff.
Have you heard of anybody using FlexiCoats?
FlexiCoat is the same thing as Plasti-Dip. It chemically, it basically is the same thing. So there is no difference. Plasti-Dip, you get more colors. That's it. I think FlexCoat is a little bit cheaper.
I thought it was sand.
Most of them, no, they are not. Because the thing with FlexCoat and Plasti-Dip is it is not plastic. It is spray on rubber, as you can see with this.
I know the FlexiCoat I've been looking at is brush on.
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. This is not sandable. Once you apply the Plasti-Dip or anything else, that's it. You cannot sand this.
There you go.
So,
We could also get it formed as moldable.
huh?
We could also
Right. So, the other reason why you want to use Plasti Dip for foam armor as opposed to something a bit harder like coating your whole armor in wood glue or whatever is that Plasti Dip will still be flexible, because you got to remember that this is foam, so it's going to have a little bit of flex, and since you are wearing it, it's going to need to flex with your body. If you coat this with something hard like a resin, or layers of wood glue or whatever, you move or the foam flexes, you get a crack. Whereas with this, all you're probably going to get is a wrinkle, at which case you can hit it with your heat gun and it takes the wrinkle right out. And that's it.
What about painting?
Huh?
What about painting?
Once the Plasti Dip is on, you can pretty much paint it. However, this piece is actually, it was sprayed with gray Plasti Dip, and then I went over it with, what is it, sweetie? Wildflower blue from Rust-Oleum. But then to get the detail, I just sprayed it with acrylic paint to get the shading through my airbrush. And then I hit it with a gloss satin flat, whatever you want the finish to be. So,
The paint will crack though, right?
no.
If you put the right stuff on it first.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and that's because that's the thing is that like her boots, I didn't bring them, but she's worn them a couple of times, and there's a piece that as we take it off and put it on, there's a bit of a wrinkle, but I just hit it with a heat gun, the wrinkle goes away. Because the thing is that paints themselves, particularly acrylic, have a bit of flexibility to them. Again, it's at a chemical level that I can't speak to. But as long as you treat your foam and spray it with a flexible material, it won't crack. Speaking on, interestingly enough, EVA, you can theoretically spray paint directly onto this right now. Theoretically. I say theoretically because chemically the spray paint will not do anything to the foam. It's not going to melt it, it's not going to eat it, or anything like that. I just say theoretically because if you spray it directly onto this foam right now, it's still going to have that foam look, and it's not really going to be pretty. So that's why I still hit it with all of my finishing stuff. So, yeah. Whereas like styrofoam, we all know if you spray paint styrofoam, it's just going to ooze and get away. So,
Same with insulation foam.
well, insulation foam is styrofoam.
Yes, but just to reinforce that it's known by multiple
Yeah.
names.
It's again, it's the difference. Like insulation foam is extruded polystyrene, whereas the styrofoam, like you get styrofoam cup, is expanded polystyrene. EVA is basically extruded polyethylene acetate. So
Polyvinyl acetate.
yes, polyvinyl.
You can take
So,
the styrofoam stuff though and coat it with latex alchemy, and then you can spray whatever you want
Yeah.
on there.
so yeah, same.
That's what we
Same.
use in theater all the time.
Yeah. So any other
Hand chemist.
Materials engineer.
I know.
yeah questions, comments, concerns?
Boost up.
Thank you.
Can I feel like the snake trying
So,
to- Is the danger snake trying to get the hat?
all right. So
Really wants
we
that
can
candle.
we can all look at the snake now.